Daniel Harrow never believed in curses, neither did his younger sister, Claire. But everything changed the night they stumbled into the ruins of Blackthorn Estate. Hidden beneath years of dust and silence, they found a crown cracked, blood-stained, and whispering with a history too dark to ignore. From the moment Daniel touched it, something ancient woke inside the shadows, a king long forgotten, waiting to claim a new heir. And soon, what began as curiosity turned into a nightmare. Neither of them could escape. The first time I saw the crown, I was exploring the outskirts of town where no one ever went anymore. The old estate loomed at the edge of the forest, half hidden by tangled branches and rotting fences. The iron gate was rusted open, sagging on its hinges, and the path beyond was overgrown with weeds that clawed at my ankles as I walked. Something about the silence drew me in. There were no birds, no insects, not even the sound of wind through the trees. It was as if the entire area had been drained of life, left hollow and waiting. Inside the mansion, the air was stale and heavy. Dust clung to every surface, and the faint smell of damp rot lingered in the walls. My footsteps echoed too loudly, bouncing down the long corridors, as if the house itself was warning me not to be there. Broken furniture lay scattered in rooms I passed, curtains eaten away by moths, and shattered chandeliers hung from the ceilings like skeletal remains. I should have turned back, but curiosity pushed me deeper into the decaying halls, until I entered what looked like a gallery. The room was vast, lined with glass displays. Most of them were empty, their contents stolen or destroyed long ago. Only one remained intact, standing in the center beneath a cracked skylight that let in a shaft of pale gray light. Inside it sat the crown. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Golden, but not the bright gold of treasure. It was dulled, tarnished, its edges chipped and broken. Along the rim, strange symbols were carved, sharp and jagged, like wounds in the metal. Across the surface were dark stains, deep and dried, in patterns that looked too much like splattered blood. My chest tightened as I stared at it. I couldn't breathe properly, but at the same time, I couldn't look away. The glass covering it was dirty and cracked, and without even realizing it, I found myself lifting it, my fingers trembling as they touched the cold surface. The moment the glass shifted, the atmosphere in the room changed. The air grew heavier, colder, like a sudden storm was about to break. My skin prickled, every hair on my body standing on end. It felt as though invisible eyes were locked on me from every corner of the gallery. I reached out and brushed the crown with my fingertips. The instant I made contact, something rippled through me, a pulse that sank deep into my bones. My vision blurred, and the glassy reflections of the skylight above wavered unnaturally. For a second, I thought I saw movement, shadows twitching at the edges of the room, shapes that leaned closer as if eager to watch. My heart hammered in my chest, and I yanked my hand back as though the crown had burned me. That was when I saw it. Not in the crown itself, but within the faint reflection that shimmered on its surface. A face, hollow eyes, skin stretched tight, lips curled in a sickly grin. A king's face, but one that looked long dead. His gaze locked on mine, and I froze in place, unable to blink, unable to breathe. Then, just as suddenly, the reflection was gone, leaving only the tarnished metal behind. I stumbled back, my legs weak, nearly tripping over the cracked tiles. The room seemed darker now, as if the single shaft of light had dimmed. The shadows pressed closer, wrapping themselves around me, whispering in the silence, though no sound touched my ears. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but I found myself walking out in a daze, unable to shake the image of that face from my mind. That night, when I finally lay down in bed, I convinced myself it had only been a trick of the light, some warped reflection in the cracked glass. But as the hours dragged on and sleep began to creep in, the weight on my chest grew unbearable. It felt as though something sat there, crushing my lungs, refusing to let me breathe freely. I opened my eyes to find the room dark, the corners swallowed in black, and in the deepest shadow, where no light touched, I saw it, a throne, not made of wood or stone, but of darkness itself, stretching high into the ceiling, and seated upon it was the figure from the crown's reflection. The king, his head tilted slightly, and though I couldn't see his mouth move, I felt his grin spread wider, sharp and endless, and on his head, gleaming faintly in the dark, was the very crown I had touched. The days after touching the crown blurred together in a haze of unease. Nothing in my life felt the same. I tried to keep my routine, to convince myself that what I had seen in the estate was nothing more than a trick of my imagination, but deep down I knew something had changed. The air felt heavier, the world quieter, as if reality itself was holding its breath around me. At night, my sleep was no longer mine. The moment I closed my eyes, I found myself in a vast stone corridor. The air was damp and cold, and the walls were lined with statues of kings. At first glance they appeared regal, but when I drew closer, I noticed their faces had been clawed away, gouged into formless pits where eyes and mouths should have been. Their crowns were cracked, their robes frozen mid-motion as though they were struggling to flee from something. The silence was unbearable, echoing against the high ceilings like a scream trapped inside my skull. No matter how I tried to turn or run, the corridor led me in only one direction: forward, always forward. I would stumble down the endless passage until I reached a massive wooden door bound with chains. The wood was blackened, splintered, and on its surface were deep scratches, as though something had tried to claw its way out. From the other side came a low growl, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. It was not the sound of an animal, but of something older, hungrier, something that had been waiting for far too long. Just as the sound reached its peak, my eyes would fly open, dragging me back into my bed, heart pounding as though I had been running for my life. But the growl did not stay behind in the dream. It lingered, faint at first, like the vibration of distant thunder. Only I could still hear it even when the world around me was silent. Lying in bed with the covers pulled up to my chin, I felt the sound in my bones, deep and hollow. Even during the day, in the middle of crowded streets or while washing my hands in the bathroom sink, I heard it low, steady, like a predator circling just out of sight. I thought I was losing my mind, but then the changes began. My reflection became strange. At first it was subtle, a slight delay when I moved my hand or blinked my eyes, like a bad signal on a broken screen. Then it grew worse. My reflection stared too long, its eyes dull and lifeless, almost glassy, as if it were studying me, learning me. I would stand still, terrified, watching as it tilted its head a fraction of a second after I did, its expression not quite matching mine. And sometimes, when the light hit the mirror just right, I saw the crown, not on my head, but on its, gleaming faintly, cracked and blood-stained, the same one I had touched in the mansion. It sat heavy on my reflection's brow, as though it belonged there, as though the mirror had already decided something I hadn't. I grew paranoid. I shut the curtains, locked every window, and kept the lights on at night, though none of it brought me peace. Each morning I woke to dirt scattered across my floor, damp patches staining the carpet as though muddy boots had trampled through my room. The footprints were too large, far larger than my own, and no matter how much I cleaned them, they returned again the next night, always leading to the same place, always ending at the foot of my bed. I began sleeping less, terrified of what I might see if I drifted off again, but exhaustion always won. When it did, the corridor returned, the faceless statues waiting for me, their blank heads tilted toward me as if listening. The growl behind the chained door grew louder each night, until it shook the very stones of the hall, and each time I awoke, the dirt and footprints were worse, spreading farther across the floor, as if whatever followed me in those dreams was crossing into the waking world, step by step. One morning as the sun broke through the window, I forced myself to look into the mirror again, desperate for reassurance. I thought maybe the light of day would banish the unease, but the reflection was waiting. It did not move when I did. Its lips were parted slightly, its chest rising and falling, though mine was still. My breath caught in my throat as I stared, and then, for the briefest second, it smiled. Not my smile, not any human smile, but something stretched too wide, jagged and wrong. I stumbled back, knocking over the lamp beside my bed, but the reflection didn't move. It only stood there, smiling, wearing the crown I never dared to touch again. The house itself began to change after that. At first it was only the creaking of the floors at night, the groaning of the walls when no wind stirred outside. I told myself it was old wood shifting, but the sounds grew heavier, deeper, like the slow inhale and exhale of lungs. Sometimes, when I placed my hand on the plaster, I swore I could feel a faint vibration, as though the walls themselves were alive and breathing around me. Paint began peeling from the surfaces in long strips, falling to the ground like dried skin. Behind the layers of paint, symbols emerged, strange shapes carved deep into the wood circles, jagged lines and markings that seemed to writhe when I stared at them too long. I knew I had never carved them. They looked ancient, their grooves dark with age, yet fresh enough that when I touched them, I felt moisture, as if the cuts were still bleeding. Every night, the dreams grew worse. The chained door was gone. In its place stood a throne room, massive and cold. Black pillars rose into a ceiling I couldn't see, and the floor stretched endlessly, tiled with slabs of stone that looked like gravestones. At the center sat the throne. It was carved from the same black stone, towering oppressive. Sitting on it was a figure that seemed to rot. As I looked at him, flesh sagged from his face, dripping like melted wax, exposing patches of bone beneath. His eyes glowed with faint fire, and though his jaw didn't move, I felt words pressing into my skull. He never spoke in a voice I could understand. It was more like thoughts forced into my mind, whispers layered upon whispers, 1,000 voices speaking at once. My skin burned as he raised a skeletal hand and pointed at me. That single gesture pierced me like a blade. Pain flared in my chest, as though something sharp had been driven straight through. I collapsed to the floor of the dream, unable to scream, choking on air that tasted of ash and blood. When I woke, my sheets were shredded, my chest ached as though I had been stabbed, and when I lifted my shirt I saw it, a faint mark pressed into my skin. A crown-shaped outline, dark and bruised right over my heart. I couldn't convince myself it was coincidence anymore. Something was bleeding from that throne room into my reality. I avoided mirrors after what I had seen, but they found me anyway. Glass reflected in places it shouldn't, darkened windows, the surface of a kettle, even puddles of water after the rain, and in every reflection I caught glimpses of something that wasn't me. A shadow behind my shoulder, a hand stretched toward me, the gleam of a crown just barely visible before I blinked. The nights became unbearable. The whispers slipped into my ears as soon as I lay down. They spoke in a language I didn't know, yet somehow understood. They urged me to kneel, to bow, to accept. My head throbbed with the pressure of their words, like my skull was too small to contain them. I stuffed pillows over my ears, but nothing blocked the sound. It came from within me, growing louder with every passing hour. One night I lost control. I stood in front of the mirror despite every part of me screaming not to. My reflection stared back, blank at first, then slowly it shifted, its mouth stretched open, wide enough that its jaw seemed to unhinge. I watched as invisible hands lifted a crown onto its head, the metal glinting with a sickly rusted sheen. My heart pounded so violently I thought it would burst. It only stared, crowned firmly in place, its grin stretching wider as blood trickled slowly from the corners of its mouth. My body grew weaker as the days dragged on. It wasn't the kind of exhaustion that sleep could fix. My skin grew pale, stretched thin over my bones, and the veins underneath darkened until they looked like ink flowing just beneath the surface. No matter how much I ate, I felt starved. No matter how much water I drank, my throat stayed dry. My reflection, when I dared to glance at it, showed me someone fading, drained by something I couldn't escape. But the throne never let me forget. It appeared everywhere now, not just in dreams. Sometimes I would blink and see it in the corner of my room, massive and black, vanishing the second I focused on it. Other times it stood waiting in the middle of the hallway, looming like a shadow cut out of reality itself. I would turn away, try to breathe, try to convince myself I was imagining it. But when I looked back, the faint impression of its outline still lingered, as if the air carried its weight. The smell followed me too. At first it was faint, a trace of smoke, as though something far away had burned. But soon it grew thicker, sharper, until my lungs ached with every breath. The scent of ash clung to my clothes, to my sheets, to my skin. Mixed with it was something worse, sweet rot, like fruit left to decay in the heat, cloying and suffocating. I scrubbed myself raw in the shower, but the odor never left. It was inside me, in my hair, in my flesh, in my blood. At night, the whispers no longer stayed in the corners. They pressed against me, right beside my ear, breathing words in a language I shouldn't have understood but did. They called me heir. They told me to rise, to kneel, to bleed, to rule. My head throbbed, my body shivered. But the worst part was how a small, traitorous part of me began to want it. The words didn't just echo, they promised. Power, escape, eternity. The kind of promises that burrowed deep and festered until I feared they weren't lies. One night, I gathered all my courage and stood in front of the mirror again. I thought maybe if I faced it directly I could fight it. I could prove to myself that it was only in my head. The reflection stared back, gaunt, hollow-eyed. The mark on its chest darker than mine, and then it moved before I did. Slowly, deliberately, it reached up and touched its brow. I watched, paralyzed, as an invisible weight lowered onto its skull. The crown appeared, gleaming faintly, resting on its head as though it had always been there. Its lips parted into a grin. My breath hitched, and I stumbled back. But my reflection leaned forward, pressing its face close to the glass until its smile seemed to stretch through the surface itself. My body convulsed with a shiver that left me gasping, my legs weak, my chest burning. I turned away, refusing to look again, but in the corner of my vision, the mirror still glowed faintly as though alive. That night I returned to the throne room in my dream, but this time, I wasn't standing on the floor. I was closer to the throne, my body trembling, my knees buckling under the crushing weight of invisible hands. The whispers had become a chant now, hundreds of voices layered into one endless demand. The throne was empty, the rotting king gone. The stone floor beneath me cracked as my body was forced forward, inch by inch toward the seat. The air grew heavy, my chest burning, my veins writhing under my skin as though alive. I clawed at the ground, trying to resist, but every time my nails scraped the stone, the pain only grew sharper, searing through my bones. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat locked, my lungs convulsed. The voices filled me, spilling through every crack of my mind until I felt I was no longer myself but a vessel waiting to be filled. When I woke, I was on the floor beside my bed, my body twisted at an odd angle. My chest burned hotter than ever, the mark now glowing faintly in the darkness. I staggered to my feet, shaking, and caught sight of the mirror, but there was no reflection. Time no longer makes sense to me. The days bleed together, hollow and shapeless, as though the world itself has slipped off its axis. I wake, I move, I eat, but none of it feels real anymore. My body goes through the motions while something else watches from behind my eyes. I can't remember when the whispers stopped being whispers and became thoughts inside my head, thoughts that don't feel like mine. People still greet me when I leave the house, though their eyes linger too long. They look at me with a strange glassy awe, like they're staring at something standing behind me, something only they can see. I try to speak, to ask them what's wrong, but my words feel swallowed, muffled before they even leave my throat. Their smiles stretch too wide, their heads dip slightly, and I realize they're bowing, not to me, to what I'm becoming. At night, there is no boundary between dream and waking. The throne is always there, waiting, carved from darkness itself. The room shifts around it, sometimes a cathedral of stone, sometimes a void without walls, but the throne never changes, always towering, always empty. Each time I see it, my body aches more, my bones creaking as if reshaping themselves for a form I don't yet understand. The mark on my chest has grown. The crown-shaped bruise has spread into jagged black veins that crawl up my throat, across my shoulders, and down my arms. They pulse faintly in the dark, glowing with the same sick fire I saw in the eyes of the rotting king. My skin feels tight, stretched over something inside me that wants to claw its way out. I catch glimpses of myself in surfaces I never meant to look at: the edge of a spoon, a pane of glass, the dark sheen of a window at night. Each time the crown is there. Each time my reflection grins wider, its eyes glowing faintly, as though it knows something I don't. The worst part is the pull. It grows stronger every night. The throne calls to me, not with words but with gravity, dragging me closer whether I'm awake or asleep. I find myself walking through my house without meaning to, stopping in the corners where the shadows are deepest. Sometimes, in those shadows, the outline of the throne flickers, waiting for me to sit. My knees buckle when I get too close, and I feel an almost unbearable pressure in my chest, a need so strong it feels like suffocation. Last night, I couldn't resist anymore. In the dream, the throne stood before me, its black surface gleaming like obsidian. The whispers became roars, demanding I kneel, demanding I rise, demanding I claim what had already chosen me. My legs moved without my command, carrying me to the base of the throne. I reached out with trembling hands, and the stone burned like ice beneath my fingers. My body convulsed as I lowered myself onto the seat. The moment I sat, everything changed. The voices went silent. The weight on my chest vanished, replaced by something worse. A force surged through me, ancient and endless, filling every vein, stretching every nerve until I thought my skin would burst. My vision blurred, and in that blur I saw them, rows of figures kneeling, faceless and countless, bowing before me in the endless dark. The crown materialized on my head, heavier than any metal, yet it felt natural, as though it had always been mine. When I opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the throne room. I was back in my own bedroom. The throne stood in the corner, massive and real now, carved from shadows that pulsed like flesh. The crown still sat on my head, though I couldn't feel its weight until I looked in the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, not delayed anymore, not distorted. It was perfect, aligned with my every movement. Only one difference remained: it smiled constantly, teeth sharp, eyes burning with fire. The sound of footsteps followed then, heavy and deliberate, echoing across the wooden floor of my room. My heart froze as I realized they weren't mine. They came closer, slow and steady, each one vibrating through the boards like the march of something enormous. I turned toward the sound, but the room was empty. Still, the footsteps continued, circling, drawing nearer until they stopped just behind me. I didn't dare breathe. The air pressed down on me, colder than ice, thicker than stone. I wanted to run, but my body refused to move. The crown burned on my head, fusing to me, veins spreading faster under my skin. The mirror flickered, and in its surface I saw it not behind me, but inside me. The rotting king, the hollow eyes, the endless grin. He wasn't gone. He was never gone. He had only been waiting for me to take his place, and now I can't tell if the throne belongs to me or if I belong to the throne.